My name is Emma. I am 70 years old and this house is not just my home. It is my soul made of wood and memory. I built it plank by plank, dream by dream 35 years ago. I know every sigh of its floorboards, every shadow the afternoon sun casts through its windows. So when I came home that Tuesday, the sound that greeted me was as alien as a scream in a cathedral. Unfamiliar laughter. A man's laughter, bouncing off the walls I had raised with my own hands. I closed the front door, the solid oak door my husband, Arthur, and I had stained a rich mahogany, and I stood very still in the entryway. My purse slipped from my shoulder and thudded softly onto the hall table. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from a deep primal sense of violation. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I followed the sound, my footsteps silent on the solid wood floor I had chosen piece by piece. And then I saw them. My daughter-in-law, Malinda, was standing by the main window in my living room, the one that looks out onto the garden Arthur and I planted together. She was gesturing with a flourish, a look of smug ownership on her face that she'd been perfecting for months. Beside her stood a man I had never seen, a stranger in a cheap gray suit, taking pictures with his phone. The finishes are all original, Malinda was saying, her voice bright and false. Look at these high ceilings, this natural light. It's a unique property, a real gem. I felt the air thicken in my lungs. I stood frozen in the doorway, a ghost in my own home. The stranger nodded, scribbling in a notebook. And the asking price is? Malinda didn't even hesitate. $475,000. It's more than fair for the location and the lot size. $475,000. The exact figure from my private insurance appraisal. The number that lived in a locked drawer in my desk. The blood drained from my face, rushing south to pool in my cold, trembling hands. Then she saw me. Her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, met mine for a fraction of a second. And in that instant I didn't see shame. I saw the rapid, cold calculation of a predator caught in the headlights, measuring the risk, plotting the lie. "Oh, Eleanor," she chirped, her voice dripping with a honey I now knew was poison. "I didn't hear you come in." I didn't answer. I just held her gaze, my own steady as stone, while the stranger extended his hand. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Mr. Albright. Just here to see the property." "My property," I corrected, my voice low but clear. Malinda let out a nervous, tinkling laugh. "It's just, well, I thought we should explore our options." She glided toward me, lowering her voice as if we were co-conspirators. "After all, you've already lived your life, Eleanor." The silence that followed was a physical blow. It sucked the air from the room. Mr. Albright coughed uncomfortably, suddenly looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. But my eyes were locked on Malinda, on this woman who had come to my door 2 years ago with a sob story and a suitcase, who had slept in my sheets, eaten from my plates, who had stood in this very room and vowed to love my son in sickness and in health. "You've already lived your life." Those 5 words echoed in my mind, each one a separate stinging slap. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling something ancient and powerful stir within me. It had been sleeping for a long time, this fire banked by grief and politeness. But now it was awake. When I spoke, my voice was deceptively calm, a flat, still lake hiding treacherous currents. "And you," I said, pausing to let the word hang in the air, "have just begun to ruin yours." Malinda blinked. The practiced smile on her face cracked and froze. "Excuse me." I didn't repeat myself. I simply turned to Mr. Albright, who was already shoving his notebook into his briefcase with frantic haste. "Mr. Albright, I apologize, you've wasted your time. This house is not for sale. It never has been, and anyone who told you otherwise has no authority to do so." The man nodded, a series of jerky, bird-like motions, muttering apologies as he scurried toward the door. Malinda tried to say something to stop him, but it was too late. The heavy front door closed with a definitive, echoing click. And then we were alone. Malinda whirled on me, the mask of sweetness completely gone, replaced by a mask of pure, undiluted fury. "How dare you humiliate me like that? I was trying to help. This house is a burden. You can't possibly maintain it. Help! I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but every syllable sharp as a shard of glass. You live here by my generosity. You eat my food. You sleep under my roof. And I find you trying to sell what does not belong to you. She paled. A complete bloodless white. I just wanted. What did you want, Malinda? My words were scalpels now, precise and merciless. To take my house from me while I'm still breathing? To leave me with nothing because you've decided my time is up? She had no answer. Her lips trembled but no sound came out. I took a step toward her, and though she is taller than me in that moment, I felt I was looking down from a great height. This conversation is not over, I whispered, the threat hanging in the air between us. But I will give you a piece of advice. Pray that your husband doesn't find out about this, before I decide what to do with you. I turned and walked up the stairs. My legs felt like water, but I would not let her see my weakness. I would not give her that satisfaction. I walked with the dignity of a queen ascending to her throne, even as my kingdom crumbled around me. I locked my bedroom door, the one behind which I had loved Arthur for 30 years, where I had nursed him through his final illness, where I had wept until I had no tears left. Only then, in the sacred silence of my own sanctuary, did I let the tremors take me. I sat on the edge of my bed, and my whole body shook. You've already lived your life. The audacity, the sheer venomous audacity of her, to look at me and decide my story was over, that I no longer deserved the very roof I had built. I clenched my fists in my lap. That was the heart of it, you see. Malinda had no idea who I was. She didn't know that this house was not just walls and windows. It was my testament. And she had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect it. But she was about to learn. Downstairs, I heard the frantic patter of footsteps, the front door opening, my son Thomas's voice, confused, asking what was going on. Then Malinda's voice, shrill and weeping, spinning her web of lies. I stood and walked to the window. From there I could see the garden I had planted with these two hands, the cherry tree we put in the ground the day Thomas was born, the stone bench where Arthur and I drank our morning coffee for 3 decades. This was not just a house. It was my life. And no one was going to take it from me. Malinda had just made the gravest error of her life. She just didn't know it yet. That night I didn't go down for dinner. I heard the soft, hesitant knocks on my door, the sound of Thomas's voice pleading, "Mom? Are you okay? We need to talk." But I didn't answer. If I opened that door, if I saw his face, the face so like his father's, I might say things that could never be taken back. Things about the woman he loved. Instead, I sat in the worn velvet armchair by the window, the one Arthur always called his thinking chair, and watched as night draped its blanket over my garden. And there, in the deepening twilight, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I remembered the woman I used to be. My name is Emma. I am 70 years old. But there was a time when 70 was a distant shore, a time when I was a force of nature. I closed my eyes and I was 33 again, my dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, my hands stained with ink and dust, hunched over a drafting table in a cramped office with no windows. It was 1989. I was one of the few women in my architecture class, and the world was still skeptical of a woman who could read blueprints as easily as a recipe. Arthur, my sweet, steady Arthur, worked as a bookkeeper. Thomas was just 4. A whirlwind of energy in our tiny rented 2-bedroom apartment in the city, where the sounds of our neighbors' lives were the soundtrack to our own. One day, Ellie, Arthur would whisper to me as we shared a cup of instant coffee in the pale morning light, "We'll have a house that you design. One that's truly ours." I would smile and nod, but inside a fierce determination burned. Not one day. Soon. For 5 years I worked like a woman possessed. By day, I designed tract houses for a firm that paid me 70 cents to the dollar of my male colleagues. In the afternoons, I taught drafting at a community college. And at night, after I'd put Thomas to bed, I'd spread my own plans across the kitchen table, working on freelance projects for small builders who wanted cheap, efficient designs. Arthur never complained. He never told me to slow down. He was my rock. He'd take Thomas to the park on weekends so I could work. He'd bring me tea when my eyes were too tired to focus. He'd rub my shoulders when the weight of it all felt like it would break me. "You are the strongest person I know, Emma," he'd murmur into my hair. And I believed him because I had to. In 1994, after 5 years of 4-hour nights and relentless saving, of saying no to vacations and yes to every extra dollar, we did it. We bought the land. A sloping, overgrown acre on the outskirts of town. A place that felt like the country back then. It was ours. I remember the first day we stood on it. The air smelled of damp earth and possibility. Arthur held my hand and asked, "What do you see, Ellie?" I closed my eyes and I saw it all. I saw the walls rising, the windows framing the sunrise, a garden for Thomas to play in, a big kitchen for Sunday dinners, a library for our beloved books. "I see our life," I told him. And then I got to work. I designed every inch of this house. I oriented it to catch the morning sun in the bedrooms. I calculated the roof pitch to shed the heavy winter snow. I designed deep closets in a pantry I could have lived in. But I didn't just design it. I helped build it. We couldn't afford to hire all the labor, so I learned. I learned to mix concrete, to lay brick, to frame a wall. My hands, once familiar only with pencils and rulers, became calloused and strong, marked with nicks and scars that I wore like badges of honor. Arthur worked alongside me every weekend. Thomas played in the dirt, building his own tiny forts among our piles of lumber. Took us 3 years. 3 years of blood, sweat, and yes, tears. 3 years of falling into bed so exhausted I could barely dream. But in 1997 we moved in. I remember our first night here, lying on a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom because our bed hadn't arrived, looking up at the ceiling I had drawn, feeling the walls I had helped raise surrounding me. And I cried. I cried great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. "What's wrong?" Arthur asked, holding me tight, his voice full of concern. "Nothing," I whispered, my face buried in his chest. "Everything is right. We did it, Arthur. We really did it. This house was my masterpiece. It was living proof that a woman with a dream and the will to see it through could move mountains." The years passed within these walls. Thomas grew up here. He learned to ride his bike on this very driveway. He had his first kiss on that porch. Arthur and I grew old here. We celebrated anniversaries, mourned lost parents, painted rooms, and planted trees. Every corner held a memory. And then 8 years ago, Arthur got sick. Pancreatic cancer. They gave him 6 months. He fought for 11. 11 months where this house became a hospice, a fortress, a temple. I cared for him here in our bed. I administered his morphine, bathed his gaunt body, read to him from his favorite novels. He died here in my arms, his eyes, clouded with pain but full of love, holding mine. His last words were, "Take care of our girl, Ellie. She's yours too." He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about the house. Because he knew. He knew it was my legacy, my proof that Emma had existed and left her mark on the world. After he was gone, Thomas wanted me to move into a condo. "It's too much for you, Mom," he'd say. But how could I leave? How could I abandon the only place where I could still feel Arthur's presence? I stayed. Alone, yes, but I was home. And now, 26 years after we built it, 35 years after I first set foot on this land, a stranger had waltzed into my living room and decided that none of that mattered. That I had lived long enough. I opened my eyes. The night was now complete, the garden swallowed by darkness, the city lights twinkling in the distance like fallen stars. I rose from my chair, my old bones protesting, and went to my closet. From the highest shelf I pulled down an old dusty shoebox. Inside were the original plans for this house, yellowed and fragile, stained with coffee drops and what I knew were tear stains. I unfolded them on my bed, the large sheets crackling with age. I ran my fingers over the lines I had drawn, over every measurement, every notation. Emma, architect. This house was worth $475,000 on the current market. But to me it was priceless. And if Malinda thought she could snatch it from me with fake smiles and forged documents, she was profoundly mistaken. Because I am Emma, the woman who built her own kingdom from the ground up. And kingdoms do not surrender without a war. The morning after the confrontation, I went down to breakfast as if nothing had happened. The performance had begun. Malinda was in the kitchen, hovering over the coffee maker. When she saw me, her whole body went rigid. Her hands stilled. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral, almost pleasant. She blinked, thrown off balance. "Gee, good morning, Eleanor." I said nothing more. I simply took my favorite mug, the chipped blue ceramic one Arthur had given me on our 20th anniversary, and waited for my turn at the pot. The silence in the kitchen was thick enough to slice. Thomas came in a few minutes later, his face a roadmap of a sleepless night. My son, my only child, 42 years old, a civil engineer with a receding hairline and worry lines already etching his face. He looked at me as if expecting a detonation. "Did you sleep well, son?" I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. His confusion was palpable. Yes, Mom. And you?" "Like a baby," I lied smoothly. "I'm going out for a few hours. Errands to run." He and Malinda exchanged a quick, loaded glance. She looked relieved. He looked wary. I didn't give them time to ask questions. I collected my keys and my purse and left the house without a backward glance. But I didn't have errands. I had a pilgrimage to make. I drove to a small quiet cafe downtown where Arthur and I used to go when the world felt too loud. I sat at a table by the window, ordered a black coffee, and let the memories wash over me. It had started 2 years ago, an unseasonably warm October afternoon. I was in the garden, deadheading the roses when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, a suitcase in each hand, and a stranger at his side. "Mom," he'd said with that nervous, hopeful smile he'd had since he was a boy. "This is Malinda. My girlfriend." Girlfriend. Not fiancé. Just girlfriend. Malinda was 32 then. Thomas 40. 8 years difference. She had a waterfall of perfectly straight blonde hair, manicured nails the color of blood, and clothes that clung to her in a way that screamed of effort. And that smile, it was a practiced, calculated thing that never quite reached her eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance," she'd said, her voice a soft, girlish coo. "Thomas has told me so much about you." I'd shaken her hand. It was cold, despite the warmth of the day. "The pleasure is mine," I'd replied, my eyes on my son. "Are you coming in? Or is this a social call?" Thomas had cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, we need a favor." Of course they did. It turned out Thomas had lost his job 3 months prior. Corporate downsizing, he'd called it. And Malinda, he explained, worked in client relations, but was between opportunities. A fancy way of saying unemployed. "We need a place to stay for a little while," Thomas had said, unable to meet my eyes. "Just until I get back on my feet. A couple of months tops." A couple of months. The famous last words of every enabling parent. I should have said no. I should have asked about her family, set boundaries, demanded a move-out date. But I looked at my son, my boy, and I saw a desperation in his eyes that broke my heart. "All right," I'd said. "You can stay." Malinda's smile then was different. It was a swift, victorious flash she tried to mask as gratitude. "Thank you, Eleanor," she'd said, already discarding the formal Mrs. Vance. "You have no idea what this means to us." The first few weeks were tolerable. Malinda was helpful, almost obsequious. She insisted on cleaning, made elaborate breakfasts, asked if I needed anything from the store. Thomas spent his days sending out resumes and going on interviews. But then the slow, insidious changes began. She started reorganizing the kitchen. "It's just more logical this way, Eleanor," she'd say, moving my pots and pans from the cupboards they'd lived in for decades. She replaced the living room curtains without consulting me. "The old ones were so faded," she justified. She brought in a sleek, modern sofa she'd found at a fantastic sale, and banished my comfortable floral print armchair to the basement. "It's more current," she declared. Each time I protested, Thomas was her shield. "Mom, it's not a big deal. She's just trying to help." Help? By systematically erasing me from my own home? But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to be the stereotypical, difficult mother-in-law. So I smiled and I swallowed my discomfort. The couple of months became 6. Then a year. Then 18 months. Thomas found sporadic contract work but nothing stable. Malinda was always looking, but never found anything that suited her. And my house was no longer mine. Malinda began having friends over without telling me. They'd congregate in my living room, people I'd never met, laughing too loud, using my good china for their pizza, leaving a trail of wine glasses and mess in their wake. When I asked them to contribute to the groceries or utilities, Thomas would look at me with those wounded puppy eyes. Mom, you know things are tight. As soon as something comes through. But nothing ever did. And with each passing day, Malinda's demeanor shifted from grateful guest to entitled heir. She started referring to my house as our house. My garden was our garden. When her friends complimented the place, she'd say, "Thank you. We've done so much to it since we moved in." The "we" was a knife in my heart. Thomas seemed blind to it, or perhaps willfully ignorant. One night, about 6 months ago, after Malinda had repainted the dining room a stark, modern gray without a single word to me, I confronted him. "Thomas," I'd said when we were alone, "we need to talk." He'd sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Mom, please. Not again. Not again." Defending what is rightfully mine. Asking for a bare minimum of respect in my own home. "Malinda respects you," he'd said, but his voice was hollow, a recitation. "She just wants the house to be nice. For all of us. It was nice before she arrived." He closed his eyes. "Mom, don't. Please. Don't what? Remind you that this is my house? That you are here out of my generosity. I know it's your house," he'd finally exploded, his voice cracking. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think she doesn't remind me every single day how grateful I should be?" I'd frozen. "Malinda says that to you?" "Not in those words," he'd continued, running a hand over his face. "But she acts like she has a right to be here. And I know she doesn't. I know because I gave her that right." He'd looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate love. "Mom, I love her. And I need you to try. For me. I love her." Those 3 words were a spell that made him see only what he wanted to see. I knew with a cold, sinking certainty that Malinda didn't love my house, and I feared she didn't love my son. She loved the security, the comfort, the free ride. But I couldn't say that. Telling a man the woman he loves is using him only makes him hate you. So I had swallowed the words. I had nodded. And I had let him believe he'd won. But that night, lying alone in my bed, I knew something between us had fractured. Something that might never be repaired. And now, sitting in this quiet cafe, the chill of my coffee cup seeping into my hands, I understood. I had allowed this. I had been so afraid of losing my son that I had begun to lose myself. I paid my bill. I walked to my car. And as I slid behind the wheel, I made a decision. I wasn't going to win my son back by arguing. I was going to win him back by showing him the truth. And for that, I needed proof. I needed to see the ants, not just the anthill. The next few days were a masterclass in observation. I became a ghost in my own home, watching, listening, documenting. And what I discovered turned my blood to ice. It began with the small things. The subtle cruelties. I'd come home to find 2 plates of a freshly cooked meal on the dining table for Thomas and Malinda, and for me a note. "There's leftover casserole in the fridge, Eleanor. We didn't know when you'd be back." I was being relegated to scraps in my own kitchen. One afternoon, I found my bedroom door locked from the outside. When I confronted Malinda, she'd smiled that infuriatingly sweet smile. "Oh, I was dusting the hall and didn't want the dust to get in. It's open now." A lie. Nothing in my room had been disturbed. She had been searching. For documents. Deeds. Something. That night I started locking my important papers away. And I began my own search. I waited until the dead of night, when the house was steeped in silence. Barefoot I crept downstairs like a thief. I started in the living room. The expensive new furniture wasn't from a sale. I found the tags hidden underneath. High-end department store. Thousands of dollars. Where was she getting the money? In the desk drawer, my desk in my study, which she had commandeered as her own, I found the answer. Piles of credit card statements. For different cards, all maxed out. Balances of $28,000, $21,000, $17,000, $12,000. Nearly $80,000 in debt. My breath caught. This wasn't just freeloading. This was a financial time bomb. And then I found it. Tucked between the pages of a magazine, a printed email exchange with a lawyer. The subject line: Inquiry re. Power of attorney due to diminished capacity. Diminished capacity. She was researching how to have me declared incompetent. To strip me of my legal rights to my own property. My hand shook so violently the papers rattled. I pulled out my phone and photographed every damning page. There was more. A property appraisal from a company I had not hired. $475,000. And scrawled in the margin in Melinda's handwriting, buyer very interested. $25,000 deposit received. A deposit? She had already taken money from my house. I stumbled back to my room, my legs barely supporting me. I locked the door and transferred the photos to my old laptop. The evidence was mounting, but it wasn't enough. I needed help. Real professional help. The next day, I went to see an old friend, Benjamin Reed. Ben and I had partnered on several projects back in the day. He was an architect, but he was also a lawyer who specialized in property law. A man in his late 60s with a brilliant mind and eyes that missed nothing. When I walked into his office and told him everything, showed him the photos, his expression shifted from concern to grim determination. Eleanor, this is fraud. Document forgery. Attempted theft. This woman isn't just opportunistic. She's dangerous. I know, Ben. What do I do? First, we go to the notary public she mentioned in these emails. We shut that down immediately. Then you have to decide how far you're willing to take this. Because this will be a war, and Thomas will be caught in the crossfire. The words landed like a physical blow. My son. Always my son. I need to think, I'd whispered. Think fast, Ben advised. Every day she has is another day she can advance her plan. I left his office with a leaden feeling in my chest. But before I went home, I did one more thing. I drove to the notary's office listed on the documents. It was a small, shabby place in a strip mall. The man who introduced himself as the notary was nothing like the professional I knew. He was slick, his smile too quick, his office too dark. I knew with a chilling certainty that he was in on it. I went home that night armed with knowledge, but feeling more vulnerable than ever. Melinda was a criminal, and my son was sharing a bed with her. A few days later, Ben called me, his voice urgent. Eleanor, I had a private investigator look into Melinda. You need to come to my office. Now. What he showed me there shattered any last remnants of doubt. Melinda's real name was Melinda Matthews, and she was already married. A marriage certificate to a man named Robert Flynn, dated 7 years ago. No divorce on record. Thomas's relationship with her. I couldn't finish the sentence. Is legally invalid, Ben finished for me. If they married, it would be bigamy. But there was more. Much more. Police reports from 2 other states. A pattern. In Houston, she'd nearly swindled an elderly couple out of their home. In Phoenix, she drained a man's bank account. She'd left a trail of broken lives and financial ruin. She was a professional con artist, and we were her latest mark. I sat in Ben's leather chair, the world tilting on its axis. Thomas, was all I could whisper. When you tell him, his world will collapse, Ben said gently. You need to be ready for that. I looked at the folder of evidence, at the faces of her previous victims. My fear began to curdle into a cold, hard rage. Ben, I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I'm not going to tell him yet. What? Eleanor, you have to. No. If I tell him now, she'll lie. She'll cry. She'll manipulate him, and he'll believe her. He'll choose her. and I will lose him forever. I met his gaze. We're going to do this my way. We're going to give her enough rope to hang herself. We're going to make the truth so undeniable, so blatant, that even Thomas won't be able to look away. Ben studied me for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. You're even more formidable than I remembered, Emma. What's the plan? First, I said, we install hidden cameras. In the living room, the kitchen, my bedroom. We record everything. Then I'm going to become the weak, confused old woman she thinks I am. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. I started leaving bank statements accidentally on my desk. I began complaining about how tired I was of all the paperwork and nonsense. I mentioned casually to Malinda that maybe I should just give Thomas power of attorney to make things easier. I could see the avarice glittering in her eyes. The trap was set. The cameras recorded it all. Her searching my room. Her phone calls to her accomplices. The old bird is ripe for the plucking, she'd said one night, not knowing the microphone was picking up every word. One more week and I'll have the power of attorney. Then we sell the place and disappear. My heart broke for my son with every new piece of evidence. But it also hardened my resolve. The final piece fell into place when Ben's investigator tracked down Malinda's legal husband, Robert Flynn. He was willing to testify. He told the investigator that Malinda had contacted him recently, bragging about the fool she was living with and his rich, old mother who was on her last legs. That was the final straw. The last ember of compassion I had for her died. I called Ben. It's time. Arrange the dinner. Everyone, he asked. Everyone. Thomas. Malinda. You. The fake buyer. The real notary. And Robert Flynn. I want them all in the same room when the curtain falls. Eleanor. There's no coming back from this. I know, I said, my voice cold as stone. She should have thought of that before she decided I had already lived my life. This response is AI generated for reference only. Continue writing chapters up to 18, of course. Here are the continuing chapters, building on the established narrative with the requested structure and detail. The night of the dinner arrived, cloaked in a serene twilight calm that belied the storm gathering within my walls. I moved through my kitchen, a general preparing for a final decisive battle. The aromas of roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes, Arthur's favorite meal, filled the air, a cruel and poignant contrast to the confrontation to come. At 7:10, I stood before my bedroom mirror. I wore a simple, elegant navy dress, the same one I'd worn to Arthur's funeral. Felt like armor. My silver hair was swept up and my eyes, though shadowed with fatigue, held a glint of unyielding steel. I touched the small decorative brooch on my collar, a hidden camera provided by Ben. Tonight, every word, every reaction would be evidence. Downstairs, Thomas was pacing. Mom, who exactly is coming to this dinner? You've been so cryptic. All will be revealed, son, I said, my voice calm. It's time for clarity. Malinda descended the stairs then, a vision in a tight crimson dress, her makeup flawless. She looked like a trophy wife attending a victory party. The irony was thick enough to taste. The doorbell chimed, its familiar sound a starting pistol. It was Ben, looking every bit the seasoned attorney with his briefcase and grave expression. Eleanor, he said, his voice a low rumble of solidarity. Next was Mr. Albright, the would-be buyer. He looked uncomfortable, confused by the formal invitation. Mrs. Vance, thank you, though I'm not sure I understand the occasion. You will, Mr. Albright. Please come in. I saw Malinda's eyes narrow slightly, a flicker of unease breaking through her composure. The third guest was Mr. Henderson, the legitimate notary public Ben and I had visited. His presence caused Malinda to visibly pale. Her hand fluttered to her throat. Mom, what is this? Thomas asked, his voice tight with confusion and a dawning alarm. Patience, Thomas. Then the final guest. I answered the door myself. There stood Robert Flynn, Malinda's legal husband. He was a simple, sturdy man in a clean but ill-fitting suit, his face etched with a lifetime of hard work and now a grim resolve. Mr. Flynn, I said, my voice steady. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Vance, he nodded, his eyes finding Malinda across the room. The color drained from her face so completely I thought she might faint. Rob? She whispered, the name a choked confession. Who is this, Mom? Thomas demanded, his voice rising. Everyone, please sit, I commanded, my tone leaving no room for argument. I stood at the head of the table, the matriarch in her court. The air was thick with tension. This dinner, I began, my gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, is about truth. A truth that has been poisoned by lies for 2 years. I looked directly at Malinda. It's time for the poison to be drawn. I nodded to Ben. He opened his laptop, and a projector cast an image onto the plain wall of the dining room. The first slide was the marriage certificate. Malinda Matthews to Robert Flynn. The date 7 years ago. Thomas, I said, my voice soft but clear. I'd like you to meet Robert Flynn, Malinda's husband. The silence was absolute, broken only by Thomas's sharp, indrawn breath. What? He croaked. No. It's a lie. Malinda shrieked, shooting to her feet. Sit down. My voice was a whip crack. The authority in it forced her back into her chair, trembling. Ben advanced the slides. Bank statements showing her $80,000 in debt. This is why she is here, Thomas. Not for love. For money. Then the video recordings began to play on the wall. Malinda's voice clear as day, from the hidden microphones. The old woman is caving. Give her 1 more week. Same plan as in Phoenix. We saw her on camera, picking the lock on my safe box, counting my money. We saw her photographing my private documents. Thomas watched, his face a shifting canvas of disbelief, horror, and devastating betrayal. He looked like a man watching his own execution. She stole $7,500 from my safe, Thomas, I said, as the video evidence played out. She forged my signature on a power of attorney. She was going to sell this house out from under me, and leave us with nothing. Finally, I turned to Robert Flynn. Mr. Flynn, would you mind telling us what Malinda said to you when she called recently? Robert's voice was rough with emotion. She said she'd found a gullible man with a house and a rich, old mother who was on her way out. She said she'd have enough money to disappear for good soon. She asked me for a loan to speed things up. That was the killing blow. Thomas made a sound, a raw, animalistic groan of pain. He shoved his chair back, stumbling away from the table. Malinda Matthews, one of them said, stepping into the dining room. You are under arrest for forgery, fraud, and grand theft. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, a cold metallic finality. As they led her away, she twisted her head, her eyes finding mine. All pretense was gone, replaced by pure, undiluted hatred. This isn't over, she spat. For you, I said, my voice quiet and final. It is. The door closed behind her. The room was left in a silence more profound than any I had ever known. The guests departed quickly after that, with murmured apologies and stunned looks. Mr. Albright was the first to flee, his face ashen. Robert Flynn shook my hand, a look of grim satisfaction in his eyes, before leaving to return to his life. Ben and Mr. Henderson stayed just long enough to ensure I was all right and to promise to handle all the legal follow-up. Then it was just Thomas and me. He had not moved from where he stood, rooted to the center of the living room rug, staring at the space where Malinda had been taken away. The grand feast I had prepared sat untouched on the dining table, the food growing cold, a symbol of the celebration that would never be. I didn't speak. I simply sat in my armchair recently rescued from the basement, and waited. The clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds, each one a hammer fall in the heavy silence. Minutes stretched into an hour. The last of the evening light faded, and I didn't rise to turn on a lamp. We were two shadows in the growing dark. Finally he stirred. His voice, when it came, was raspy, scraped raw from unshed tears. How long have you known? Weeks, I answered honestly. Ben and his investigator put it all together. And you didn't tell me. It wasn't an accusation, not quite. It was a statement of profound hurt. If I had just told you, Thomas, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought your old mother was jealous, causing trouble? He was silent. That was answer enough. I needed you to see it, I continued softly. I needed the evidence to be so overwhelming, so undeniable, that you couldn't explain it away. I couldn't risk you choosing her. I would have lost you forever. He turned then, and in the dim light, I could see the tracks of tears on his face. I let her. I saw how she treated you. I saw you eating alone. I heard the way she spoke to you. And I did nothing. His voice broke on the last word. How can you even look at me? I rose and went to him. I took his face in my hands, just as I had when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. I look at you and I see my son, the boy I raised, the man your father and I hoped you would become. People make terrible mistakes when they are in love, Thomas. They see what they want to see. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about love. And I will always love you. He collapsed into my arms then, sobbing great, heaving sobs that shook his broad shoulders. I held him, my own tears finally falling, mingling with his in the dark. We wept for the betrayal, for the lost time, for the trust that had been shattered. We wept for Arthur, who wasn't here to guide his son. We wept for the 2 years of our lives that had been stolen by a phantom. When his tears subsided, he pulled away, wiping his face with his sleeve. I have to make this right, Mom. I don't know how, but I will. I know how, I said, my voice firming. I walked to the sideboard and took out a long white envelope I had placed there earlier. You're going to move out. He stared at me, stunned. What? No, I can't leave you alone after. It's not a punishment, Thomas. It's a prescription. I handed him the envelope. Years ago, your father and I bought a small 2-bedroom apartment as an investment. It's in a good complex close to the tech park. It's yours. He looked down at the envelope as if it were a live snake. I can't accept this. Not after everything. You can and you will. But there are conditions. I held up a finger. 1. You live there alone. No roommates, no new girlfriends moving in. You need to learn who you are without anyone else. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. I held up a second finger. 2. You will support yourself. I don't care if you're digging ditches or designing skyscrapers. You will pay your own bills with the sweat of your own brow. I held up a third and final finger. 3. Every single Sunday you come here. We will have dinner. We will talk. We will rebuild what was broken between us. Not as a mother and a dependent son, but as a mother and a son who are a family. He looked from the envelope to my face, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame and burgeoning hope. Why are you doing this for me? Because you are my son, I said simply. And I believe in second chances. I paused, letting the weight of my next word sink in. But this is your only second chance, Thomas. There will not be a third. He took the envelope, his hands trembling. He opened it and looked at the deed, his name typed clearly on the owner line. Fresh tears welled in his eyes, but these were different. They were tears of gratitude, of resolve. Thank you, Mom, he whispered. I swear to you, I won't let you down. More importantly, I said, laying a hand on his cheek, don't let yourself down. He stayed that night, his last night as a resident in this house. The next morning he packed his things. His, not Melinda's. Didn't even fill the car. At the door he hugged me tighter than he had in years. I love you, Mom. I love you too, son. Always. I watched him drive away and then I closed the door. I leaned against it, the solid oak firm at my back. The house was silent. Truly silent. For the first time in 2 years it was mine again. The air felt lighter. The shadows felt like old friends, not hiding places for lies. The war was over. The long, hard work of healing was about to begin. The silence in the days that followed was a living thing. It wasn't the hostile, tense silence of Melinda's occupation, but a deep, resonant quiet, like the calm after a storm. The house and I were reacquainting ourselves. I did not rest. I worked. I started in the room they had shared. I stripped the bed, bundling the sheets she had slept on directly into a garbage bag for donation. I cleared the closet of every last trace of her. The cheap, shiny fabrics a stark contrast to the quality of the wood and the memories embedded in this room. I opened the windows wide, letting the crisp autumn air scour the space, washing away the lingering scent of her cloying perfume. It was cathartic, this physical purge. With every item removed, every surface I scrubbed, I felt a little lighter, a little more like myself. Next, I tackled the living room. I called a local charity and had them take away the ostentatious, uncomfortable sofa she had bought. I went down to the basement and, with some effort, brought my old floral armchair back to its rightful place by the fireplace. I rehung my own curtains, the ones with the faded pattern that reminded me of a summer garden from long ago. I was reclaiming my territory, not with anger, but with a quiet, determined reverence. Thomas called every day. His voice was subdued, still heavy with shame, but there was a new thread of purpose running through it. He'd landed a temporary job with the construction survey crew. It was hard physical work, far beneath his qualifications as an engineer, but he sounded proud when he told me about it. "My back is killing me, Mom, but the foreman said I'm a quick learner." I felt a surge of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. He was doing it. He was keeping his promise. On his first Sunday visit, he arrived precisely at 6, holding a bouquet of drooping daisies and a warm, crusty loaf of bread. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. The dinner was awkward at first. The ghost of the last dinner, the Dinner of Damnation, hung between us. But we talked of safe things. His new job, the leaky faucet in his apartment that he'd fixed himself, the book I was reading. It was stilted, but it was a start. It was real. After he left, I sat in my reclaimed armchair, the familiar comfort of it a balm to my soul. The house no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. It was filled with me again. With my books, my memories, my spirit. A week later, a formal letter arrived from Ben. Malinda had been formally charged with multiple counts of forgery, fraud, and grand theft. Given her history and the mountain of evidence, the district attorney was offering a plea deal. 8 to 12 years in state prison. She had taken it. There would be no trial, no dramatic courtroom showdown. It was over. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same shoebox that held the original plans for this house. It was another piece of its history, a dark chapter now closed. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Arthur passed. I put on my old gardening gloves, worn soft with use, and went out into the garden. The autumn chill was in the air, but the sun was warm on my back. I began the work of cutting back the perennials, preparing them for their winter sleep. My hands, now age-spotted and veined, worked the earth, pulling weeds, trimming dead branches. As I worked around the base of the cherry tree, my trowel hit something hard. I dug carefully around it with my fingers, brushing away the dark soil. It was a smooth, flat river stone. I turned it over. There, in Arthur's unmistakable handwriting, painted in faded white, were our initials, Evie plus Evie, and the date we planted the tree. I had forgotten we'd buried it there, a secret cornerstone for our growing son. I clutched the cool stone in my palm, feeling the solid truth of it. This was what mattered. This was what endured. Love, commitment, memory. Not the cheap lies of a con artist. Sitting back on my heels, I looked at the house. The afternoon sun glinted off the windows I had designed to catch the light just so. This house had withstood storms, both meteorological and personal. Its foundations, both physical and emotional, were strong. I am Emma. I am 70 years old. I have lived a life. And I am not finished yet. The first hard frost came, silvering the garden and etching delicate patterns on the window panes. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke from the fireplace and the rich aroma of a pot roast simmering in the slow cooker. Sunday dinner had become our sanctuary. Thomas arrived, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, carrying a bottle of wine and a story about a near disaster with a misplaced survey stake. He was filling out, the manual labor adding a new solidity to his frame. The haunted look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a quiet confidence. Over dinner, the conversation drifted, as it sometimes did now, into more dangerous waters. "I got a letter from her lawyer," he said, pushing his peas around his plate with his fork, asking if I'd be willing to provide a character witness, to plead for leniency. The air in the room went still. I carefully set my own fork down. "And what did you say?" He looked up and his gaze was clear and steady. I said no. I told him the person I thought I knew never existed. I have nothing to say on her behalf. The relief that washed through me was so profound it left me lightheaded. It was the final confirmation that he saw the truth, that he had truly broken free of her spell. "It was the right thing to do, Thomas." "I know," he said. "It's just strange. To have shared your life with a phantom." We sat with that for a moment, the crackle of the fire the only sound. "Ben called me yesterday," I said, changing the subject. "He's retiring. He asked if I'd be interested in taking over the lease on his old office space. The one downtown with the big north-facing windows." Thomas looked surprised. "What for?" A small secret smile touched my lips. This was the new seed that had been germinating in the quiet of my reclaimed home. "I've been thinking. I'm not ready to just putter in this garden until I die. I have decades of knowledge in this head. I was thinking of starting a small non-profit design consultancy for older people, mostly women, who want to renovate their homes to age in place gracefully, or for young families who need smart, affordable designs." Thomas stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first one I'd seen that reached his eyes in years. "Mom, that's brilliant." "It's just an idea," I demurred, but my heart was singing. "It's a fantastic idea," he insisted. "You could call it Vance Design for Living or something. I could help. I could do the structural reviews pro bono." And there it was. A new beginning, not just for him but for me. Not defined by the wrongs done to us, but built on the strengths we were rediscovering. We were no longer just a mother and son picking up the pieces. We were becoming partners. After he left, I stood at the living room window watching my breath fog the cold glass. The garden was sleeping under its blanket of frost, but I knew the bulbs were nestled deep in the earth, gathering strength for the spring. There was a parallel there, a promise. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in a long time, I was eager to start writing. Ben's old office was exactly as I remembered it. High ceilings, dusty beams, and those magnificent large-paned north-facing windows that provided perfect shadow-free light for drafting. The scent of old paper and coffee hung in the air, a perfume of potential. Standing in the middle of the empty space, a set of keys cold in my hand, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in 30 years. This was mine. My venture. My risk. Thomas met me there the next day, tape measure and notebook in hand. "Okay, Mom. Let's see what we're working with." For the next few hours, we were no longer mother and son grieving a betrayal. We were architect and engineer assessing a space. He measured and called out numbers. I sketched them onto a fresh sheet of vellum spread on the floor. We debated the best place for the drafting table, where to put a small library, how to configure the client meeting area. "We could put a partition here," he suggested, pointing to a spot on my rough sketch, "to create a more private consultation space." "No," I said, my mind's eye already seeing it. "I want it open. I want the clients to see the work in progress. I want it to feel collaborative, not corporate." He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "You've really thought about this?" "I've had a lot of quiet time to think," I replied, my voice dry. He had the grace to look chastised, but then he smiled. "It's going to be great." We worked through the afternoon, our enthusiasm feeding off each other. This project was a lifeline for both of us. For him, it was a way to rebuild his professional confidence and to make amends in the most tangible way possible. For me, it was a rebirth. That evening, back in my own kitchen, I unrolled the preliminary sketches on the table. The clean lines, the purposeful spaces, it was a physical manifestation of my resolve. I was not a victim clearing away the wreckage of her life. I was a creator building something new. The phone rang. It was Sarah, an old friend from my architecture days, having heard the news through the grapevine. Emma, starting her own firm at 70. I should have known you'd never truly retire. Tell me everything. As I described my vision for the consultancy, her excitement was palpable. I have 3 clients for you right now, she said. A widow in her 80s who needs her bathroom made accessible, and 2 young mothers looking to build additions so their families aren't squeezed into tiny homes. It was no longer just a monument to my past. It was the headquarters for my future. The walls that had witnessed so much pain were now witnessing a resurrection. I picked up a pencil, its familiar weight a comfort in my hand. There was work to do. The transformation of the office space was slow but steady. Thomas spent his weekends there, patching walls and installing shelving with a focused intensity one hadn't seen in him since he was a boy building model airplanes with his father. I focused on the business side, filing paperwork, setting up a simple ledger, and drafting introductory letters to local community centers and senior living facilities. One Tuesday morning, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was the Women in Architecture Foundation. My heart gave a little jump. I hadn't had any contact with them in over a decade. Inside was a formal letter. They were hosting their annual gala, a prestigious event I had attended with Arthur in what felt like a different lifetime. The letter was an invitation, but it was more than that. It was a request. Dear Ms. Vance, it read, in recognition of your pioneering career and your inspiring new venture, we would be honored if you would accept this year's Lifetime Achievement in Design Award and say a few words to our members. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the expensive paper trembling in my hands. A Lifetime Achievement Award. It felt like a message from the universe, a direct rebuttal to Malinda's venomous words. You've already lived your life. For a moment, doubt crept in. I was 70. I was starting over from scratch. Who was I to accept such an award? I was no longer the young, hungry architect changing the world. Then I looked at the preliminary blueprints for the office, rolled up on the counter. I thought of Thomas, his hands callous from manual labor, his spirit healing through honest work. I thought of my quiet, reclaimed house. I was not the woman I had been at 30. I was something else. Something forged in fire and tempered by loss. I was a survivor, yes, but I was also a creator again. I called Thomas. Mom? Everything okay? I've been invited to receive an award, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. At the Women in Architecture Gala. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then a whoop of joy that was so purely wonderfully Thomas that it brought fresh tears to my eyes. Mom, that's incredible. Of course you're going. They've asked me to speak, I added. Even better. You'll be magnificent. What will you wear? We have to go shopping. His unbridled enthusiasm washed away the last of my doubts. This wasn't just an award for the past. It was a recognition of the present. It was an affirmation that a life could have many acts, that achievement had no expiration date. I suppose I should say yes, I said, a smile finally breaking through. Damn right you should, he laughed. I'll be there in the front row, clapping the loudest. As I hung up, I realized this was another step in our healing. He wasn't just my son, he was my champion. And I, in starting this new chapter, was giving him something to be proud of, something to believe in beyond the shadow of his own mistakes. I picked up my pen to write my acceptance letter. The words came easily. I knew exactly what I wanted to say.